How do we put ourselves in situations where we might be able to see people who are different from ourselves as kinfolk? It requires some self-discipline to say, I'm not gonna greet Uncle Joe with the label that I've stuck on him. I'm not even gonna greet him with the label he stuck on himself. I'm gonna take off my old glasses and put on some new lenses. I'm gonna look at this person in a different way. And I think this is our job.
Hey everyone, it's Hildy, and this is the Creating the Future podcast. I'm glad you've joined us here today. This is a place for us to explore what really creates social change, what will actually create the healthy, joyful future we all want to live in. I'm so happy that Joshin Byrnes is joining us for the podcast today. Joshin is the founder and guiding teacher at Loaf Mountain Zen Community, where they apply everyday mindfulness and practical, action-based compassion to eliminate the margins that keep people marginalized. Prior to taking this path, Joshin spent years in the philanthropic world, his last position being the president and CEO of the Santa Fe Community Foundation. Given Joshin's blend of the spiritual and the practical, always with an eye to making life more livable for all beings, it is my joy to welcome Joshin Byrnes to the podcast today. It is such a pleasure to see you, Joshin. I have been so looking forward to our conversation. I love when I get to see you, and this is a treat. So welcome.
Thank you, Hildy. Me too. My heart leapt when I got your note. I just thought, oh yeah, this is definitely someone I should be talking with these days. I know we both care about so many of the same things.
If you could just start by talking about why you care. Talk a little bit about what is it in your life that has led you to be so passionate about social justice?
Well, I don't know. I mean, we all have our lived histories, and then we have like a view or a lens on our lived histories. And for me, I have to say, I'm 65 now. I look back on my life, and I'd say the biggest brushstroke I could paint is, as a young person growing up, I lived in a very economically stressed family that suffered and struggled. And those struggles got worse the more isolated my family became, disconnected, when they moved away from a tight-knit community into the suburbs. And the challenges we were already facing just got harder for everybody. And then my own kind of escape from the kind of trap of all of that through education and career choices and friends and networks that I was lucky enough to be able to have. And then to a very different experience in life of being a professional, a solidly middle-class person, getting a higher education, and then looking back over the whole thing and trying to make sense of it. And what was it that allowed me to break out of some of the things that were holding me back, but also what was lost in the shift out of the kind of tight-knit community experience I grew up with into a more professionalized, educated world. So it's just been a lifelong inquiry into all this, and I care about people across the whole economic continuum. My career has allowed me to work deeply and closely with people who experience tremendous poverty and marginalization, all the way through some of the wealthiest, most philanthropic people on the planet. And I got to know all of them as people, not as labels or diagnoses or categories, but as people. And then you see what makes everybody tick. It's kind of the same. Everybody wants to love. Everybody wants to have a good life. Everybody wants to be able to look back on their life and think it's had some meaning and purpose. And that's just always been something that's motivated me or inspired me to see that in folks.
It's definitely been a thread through so many of the different aspects. You've had career changes that
Yeah.
those are some pretty big swings. For our listeners, you and I did a podcast interview. It's got to be almost 15 years ago. And you were leaving your position as head of the Santa Fe Community Foundation to become a Zen priest.
That's right. And Zen teacher. And so I did that. And I took my experience with me. I used to work in the AIDS epidemic before that for a long time, and then did community philanthropy. And then as I was really drawn to the Zen peacemaker tradition, which is a little bit of an offshoot of a Japanese style of Zen, but that was westernized by a great thinker and change maker, a guy named Bernie Glassman, the first American-born Zen master in our lineage, who was a Jewish guy from New York who did a deep dive into Zen, and then his teacher said to him, go make an American Zen. And so what Bernie did was went back to Yonkers, New York. He started a bakery based on Zen principles, hired all the unemployable people he could find, people coming out of prison, substance use treatment programs, homelessness. There was a yellow pad of paper outside the front of the bakery, and you just signed up. And when your name came up, you got a job.
Wow.
They used to say, we don't care where you've been, we care where you're going. And that bakery grew and is now, even today, the producer of all the brownies for Ben & Jerry's chocolate fudge brownie ice cream.
Oh my gosh.
And they hire many, many hundreds of people, thousands over the years. And this was an expression of Zen that really moved me and motivated me. Because I was once earlier in life a Catholic friar, monastic, but then left the church and was kind of wandering around questioning the value of spirituality at all. And then stumbled upon Bernie Glassman's work, and it was a style of spiritual practice that checked all the box, or like I used to say, made my socks go up and down, and I just thought, oh yeah, this is the thing I can do, a contemplative form of social action. So I did that. I did trained, for 10 years of Zen training. Then in 17, I guess, I went through this process of being authorized as a fully independent Zen priest and teacher. And with that, I then started a new Zen center called Loaf Mountain Zen Community, which is here in Vermont, named after the nearby mountain, Loaf Mountain. And since then, since 2017 to today, we've been trying to keep that Zen peacemaker spirit going. So we currently have a Zen center. In fact, today I'm just finalizing the process of renovation of a new building that we just purchased that combines not only the meditation hall, but also a drop-in center called Gather. We call it a community living room that welcomes everybody and anybody from any segment of the community in whatever shape you're in to get together, have some food, conversation, talk, and get to know one another. That's been going on for 3 years, and we're now moving into a bigger space. And we also, right next door, we purchased an apartment complex that provides supported transitional housing to people coming out of prison, homelessness, mental health services, and so on. And we really believe in neighborliness. And so we kind of decided, well, that building came up for sale. It's our next door neighbors. We should stretch and purchase it and open it up to folks who really need housing and who really need good neighbors. And we need good neighbors. And so we started that recently as well. So that's been really fun. And it's a way for me to use a lot of my past experience working in lots of populations who face a lot of risk in our society or struggling for all kinds of reasons, bringing together the philanthropic community to make that happen, and bringing together this Zen practice. So yeah, it's been a funny this way, that way kind of path. And yet there's kind of a thread through it. As I look back now, there's a thread. Yeah.
Before we get into the main question at the heart of this podcast, which is really about social change, if you had, and I know that there's millennia of trying to answer this question, but if you had a sort of nutshell version for our listeners who may not be familiar with Zen, how would you describe what it is to be in a Zen community? Because so often we think of places that, yes, you can get housing so long as you listen to our sermon.
Yeah, no.
There's
yeah,
so much of that. And so I just want to sort of clarify what is Zen and what does that practice look like?
Well, the old timers, the ancient folks used to say Zen is all of life. And I kind of like that definition. Zen is the recognition that everything in the world is working together and we're a part of it. And there's no way to be separate from it. So in Zen, there's no deity, there's no theology. It's a way of seeing. And what you're seeing is that everything is connected and everything is always dynamic and changing. And that view that everything is connected and everything is changing is grounded in an ethic of care. Because we belong to one another, we care. And our ethic is to care. So we have ethical precepts and all that kind of stuff that we repeat all the time. But bottom line, it's like, hey, man, we're all in this together and we have to care about each other. And I would say that's what Zen is. And Zen is a Buddhist tradition. There are many different Buddhisms, just like there are many different Christianities or Abrahamic kind of expressions of religion. But Zen has its roots in Buddhism and Taoism. And so it takes a lot of lessons from observing the experience of living and observing the natural world and seeing the natural resiliency of that as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
Does that help?
Oh, it's a beautiful description. Thank you. It leads right into the question that is at the heart of this podcast, which is when you see change happening in the world, and at this critical time, it's probably the more important than ever to be thinking about it. When you see change happening, what do you see as the factors that contribute to change? What actually creates change?
Such a good question. And it's a good question to ask of a lot of different people, as you do, because we all have our opinions. I have my opinions. My opinions are based on my experience and what's conditioned my way of thinking. So before I actually answer the question, I just want to say one thing about that, which is, a lot of things go into our ideas about what's right, what's wrong, what's working, what's not working. And I think one of the real dangers in society today is that we get very rigidly attached to our opinions. And one of the things about Zen, in addition to it doesn't need to convince anybody of anything, it's not proselytizing, it's not converting anybody or anything like that. But one of the things I think that it's been teaching me is to hold my own ideas as opinions and to really get curious about other people's opinions and to never stop learning from them. So I wanted to say that as a caveat, because I don't know. I have some thoughts. When I told that story at the very beginning about growing up in this tight-knit community in Brooklyn for a reason, which is, as I look back on that experience, what I remember so fondly and what I think left its biggest mark on me was the sense that we belonged to one another. A belonging has its shadow too. Once you say we belong together, then it's, well, who's outside that belonging? And we have to deal with that. We have to contend with that. But there's something very valuable about really getting to know people and knowing them in the context of the fullness and richness of their life, all the ups and downs of that. And that extends beyond just their political belief or their religious belief or their opinion at this moment in time. There's something vast about being a human. And once we kind of appreciate that in others and get to recognize what we're sharing together is that vast experience, then I think we grow in commitment. So when I've seen change happen and the conditions I try to create in trying to stimulate some positive change is, at first, we have to be willing to be in each other's company. So I'll say proximity. That's maybe a kind of a black and white, unemotional way to talk about it. But can we actually hang out a little bit in the same spaces and observe each other as we move through the waves of life, the ups and downs, the losses, the loves, the happiness, the sorrows, illness, and good health? Can we just observe that in each other and care about each other in some really just basic way because we're close, because we're near each other physically? So I think proximity is a really important part of change making. In my Zen training, we practice plunging into environments that we've distanced ourselves from. Look in America, and we don't often have much interaction with people who are in a different class than we are, or a different educational level, or a different, increasingly different political perspective. We hole up together, we segregate ourselves, and we lose that proximity. And like I said, proximity is kind of a black and white way to talk about it. I think there are more emotional ways to talk about it too, which is like, how do we put ourselves in situations where we might be able to see people who are different from ourselves as kinfolk? Like, where's the quality of kinship? How can we cultivate that? Because I think once we begin to identify people as kin, then we start to make changes. We're willing to sacrifice some stuff. We're willing to change our minds. We're willing to operate out of a more altruistic intention as opposed to one of self-interest. We're willing to roll up our sleeves for our kinfolk. And so I think when I've seen change happen, that's where I've seen it happen. You know,
When you talk about kin, Joshin, I'm thinking about how many families are being torn apart by the fact that they have different political beliefs. And we're not inviting Uncle Joe to Thanksgiving anymore because
Right.
we just don't agree.
Right.
What bridges that?
Yeah. I mean,
because anymore, just seeing each other as kin doesn't seem to be enough. I don't know if we're really seeing the heart in each other.
well, I don't think we're seeing each other as kin. I think we're seeing each other as our moment in time belief systems.
Mm.
We're seeing each other not for who we really are, but for the placard that we think that other person's carrying. And it requires some self-discipline to say, I'm going to do something radical here. I'm not going to greet Uncle Joe with the label that I've stuck on him. I'm not even going to greet him with the label he stuck on himself. Can I meet him just as Joe and ask him how he's doing and ask him what he loves about his life and what kind of food he likes to eat and what breaks his heart these days? We've just so lost the capacity to ask those questions of one another. Instead, we sit across the Thanksgiving table and Uncle Joe's there and we're fuming because Uncle Joe's wearing a red hat. And we forget that Uncle Joe has brokenheartedness, that Uncle Joe knows love. So it's discipline on our part. It's discipline to say, I'm going to ask a new question. I'm going to take off my old glasses and put on some new lenses. I'm going to look at this person in a different way. And I think this is our job.
You're getting to the point of change is personal. What does that look like societally?
Oh, yeah. I'm so glad you say that. I would say durable change arises out of experiencing the intimacy that exists between things. And I think change happens when we work within the sphere of our connections. So small scale efforts really, really matter. I've really come to believe that, having worked in public health and social change philanthropy and all that stuff. It's like when I get to know people's names and know a little bit about where they've been and where they want to go, then something really different takes over me. And I'm not thinking about how to prove my point or convince them. I live in a pretty rural place, and I have the gift, really, of living in small communities. And we started this project called Gather. We call it a community living room. And it's really just that. Nobody knows what a community living room is. So they come in and like, what is this place? We're like, well, it's just like a living room. You want a cup of coffee? Let's sit down. And it's amazing the kinds of conversations we wind up having with people. I can't tell you the number of folks who come to Gather and after a few weeks will say, I started to meet Jerry. I passed that guy for years in our little town. I never knew who he was. I'd see him in the store. Now I know that he's one of 12 kids and he grew up on that farm down the road and he's dealing with X, Y, and Z. And all of a sudden, on the sidewalks of Middlebury, Vermont, Jerry and Colleen are friendly and saying hi to each other. They've lived in this community together for 20 years. They never knew each other. Now they know each other. That's how change happens. So now Colleen and Jerry have an investment in each other's well-being. They're invested in each other. And after a bad storm, they ask each other, how'd you do? Or when they know one of them's going through a hard time, they're there and they know the details enough in their life to ask them a specific question about their lives, not just a hi, how are you?
Right. Our lives are so fast-paced these days and so filled with doing.
Yeah.
So often we see taking the time, even for our friends, even for the people we already know and already love, and seeing that almost sometimes as a chore. What you're talking about really takes intentional slowing down to be with each other.
Yeah, it's the art of hanging out. It's a lost art, it's a lost art. We used to kind of hang out more. We don't hang out so much anymore. And when we don't hang out together, we then forget who each other are, we lose track. And because there's no unstructured time to just shoot the shit. And it's kind of like in the workplace that those water cooler conversations are what help you kind of really care about showing up for work. I mean, yes, the mission and all that stuff, but it's the people too. And you got to know the people. And part of the way we do that is by really reclaiming the art of hanging out with each other. The social science literature talks about third spaces. And it's that kind of space where people from many different walks of life come together for some kind of shared experience. Maybe it's just music. It used to be church and stuff, but that's kind of gone by the wayside for many, many people. And it's also been co-opted by political ideology, the church experience. And it wasn't always like that. But there aren't many spaces for people to just hang out and let the magic of doing nothing happen, because we've forgotten how to do nothing.
Yeah, I'm thinking so much about these, that there is a lot of talk about creating intentional spaces so that people can be together. And so often we think about them as facilitated spaces. Yeah. We'll talk about this, or what you're really talking about in that art of hanging out is not facilitated. We often talk at Creating the Future about the fact that change happens in people's living rooms. It's when people are connecting and talking to each other. But that's not facilitated.
Right. Yeah, that's why we created Gather, which is all we did was set up the space and unlock the door. That I tell them all the time. That's our practice, is to just open the door and welcome everyone. Don't worry about anything else. Oh yeah, one other thing you need to worry about, make sure the coffee pot's going.
I was going to say food.
Yeah,
definitely food.
That's it. And then people come in and we don't have to do anything. Now, it's not to say that's the silver bullet for everything that's wrong in society. I do think it's a necessary piece of the puzzle, though. And I can say now that I've really experienced it firsthand, that my sense of care has widened and deepened. Who I care about and what I care about has changed just because I'm hanging out with people who are different than me. I'm a pretty dyed-in-the-wool Democrat, blue, lefty, whatever you want to call it. When I go vote, that's where I'm at. But you know who I've gotten close to? All kinds of MAGA people who come and hang out with us. And sometimes they come in and they've been wearing their MAGA t-shirt or MAGA hat. They're like, I'm wearing that here because I'm trying to to get it to go. Yeah, I'm trying to go there. I'm like, well, okay, that's cool. You want some coffee, And next thing you know, they're bringing a 5-pound bag of sugar for the coffee thing. They're coming to our Thanksgiving dinner. They're coming to midday quiet, 15 minutes of quiet time with each other. And we're discovering actually some kind of kinship. That's what we're discovering. And I find that very powerful. And I feel like without that, then I'm just preaching. Then I'm just trying to convince somebody of something. I've kind of forgotten about, like I said earlier, the kind of depth and vastness, breadth of what it means to be a human being, all the complexity of that. Yeah.
You're reminding me of a story that happened to me. It's got to be a decade ago. My daughter works in Hollywood, and I was invited to my first Hollywood party. And
what did you wear?
I did not fit in. And I was nervous as could be. And I was going to meet, she was working on a TV show. I was going to meet people I'd seen on TV for 20 years and 30 years, and nervous as could be. And fortunately, I've got my own practice in catalytic thinking and my Zen practice to just approach people as people. And Lizzie introduced me to Tim Matheson, the actor Tim Matheson. And I asked him, I said, wow, it's really, really wonderful to meet you. What's exciting in your life these days? And I watched Joshin, I watched his face light up, and he told me about his kids, and he told me about his family. And it was just such an interesting change because I was watching everybody else in the room posturing. And it was this very, very brief moment where this person who is used to being asked, what's your next project? And how did you like working with such and such? That he was just able to just talk about his kids and talk about what was going on in his life. Yeah. And you're really reminding me of that.
Yeah, and that's really important because I think one of the tricky things that I've had to navigate has been everything we do at this Bread Loaf Mountain Zen community is based on donations and charitable giving. And I came out of that world for the, 10, 15 years. And one of the things I really disliked about that world was we used to confuse friendship with getting someone to make a gift. This very transactional thing, and the friendship kind of depended on that. And I get it. That's the way the fundraising world works in many ways. They even use that term, friends, in the donor world. But I really didn't want to do that at Bread Loaf Mountain. And we're all trained to do that. So I felt like first of all, people give $5 to us. Just yesterday, someone slipped me a $5 bill, And we have people who have given a couple $100,000. It's like the whole range of folks. And I try, this is again self-discipline, which is I am going to treat these people exactly the same way. Exactly the same way. I'm going to be curious about them. I'm going to give them the same amount of time. I'm going to listen, and I'm going to be transparent with them.
Transparent in what ways?
Sometimes I find I have to say to a donor, I want you to know where I'm coming from here. Which is our relationship doesn't depend on you financially supporting us. And even as I say that, I hope you'll consider supporting us. But I'm also going to be honest with you. I'm not going to tell you what you want to hear. I'm not here just to get my hand in your pocket. I'm not. And if ever you feel that way from me, I'm asking you as a gift to me to say so. I try to be upfront and out there with everyone in that way, And there are also sometimes people come and I'm really concerned about them. And I'll say, listen, I want to share an observation or a sense that I have about something I'm seeing here. And it doesn't mean I don't like you. And I don't want to put our friendship at risk. But I wonder if you're open to me sharing. And if not, that's cool. But I want to know, can I share a concern I have? It's like that level of transparency. And I think that, again, if we're in the company of others, if we have proximity to each other, not just as a one-off, not just as that one encounter, but we are in a long-term relationship with each other that is dynamic and changing. Then I think trust over time builds and deepens. And we can say things to each other that we're not able to say when we see each other just when we want something from each other. You know what I'm saying?
Very much so. I'm thinking about the amount of time that you have spent immersing yourself in homeless communities, in places where you intentionally go And speaking of the art of hanging out, and hang out. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, it happens in a few different ways. One is I have a spiritual practice of going around America and becoming voluntarily homeless for about a week at a time. And I'll go with nothing except kind of the clothes on my back and maybe a blanket and an ID. And then I'll just disappear into the streets for a while. It comes out of some of my background. My father was homeless in Manhattan for many years. And in some ways, I started doing this street retreat practice as a way to just understand some aspect of his life and to heal something that got broken between him and me. So that I went out there to heal something in myself. But I've also tried to go into those settings and not just see the suffering of the world, but to see the whole situation, the joy and the suffering. I'm not sitting there on a street retreat bearing witness just to homelessness. I'm bearing witness to all the things that are going on there. Yes, the homeless person. Yes, the feeling of the sidewalk. Yes, the generosity of many, many people. Yes, the busyness of people's lives who are walking fast and going by. The big hearts and the small hearts. I'm allowing myself to see myself in all of that and all of that in me. And that shifts something in me. And it's another way in which this proximity opens up the potential for kinship to develop. And across the whole economic spectrum.
Yeah. We can't put ourselves in somebody else's shoes unless we have that proximity.
The most common thing is many people want to show me what their lives are like. They want someone to see them and to observe some aspect of who they are. And sometimes what you see is tremendous creativity, a lot of love, a lot of wisdom and insight, clarity, often very imaginative spirituality, finding meaning in all kinds of things. There's a lot there, so much richness, And then there's also cynicism and some distrust and doubt.
But we can't help if we don't really understand. And then we get into the savior complex of these people should and those people should. I so appreciate the work that Mark Horvath has been doing. Well, people, these are humans. I want you to just tell your story.
Yeah. And again, proximity.
Exactly.
These are his people. He belongs to them and they belong to him. Like, I'm a human, you're a human. I'm interested in that about us. About us. What is that like for you? What's that experience of being human like for you?
Yeah. But for you, this is not a recommendation that people go do this. This is for you, your own spiritual practice. This is in part your own healing.
Yeah, it certainly is. This is one of the interesting things about Buddhism. We'd call it Western convert Buddhism. Mostly white, well-educated, well-meaning, liberal people gathering together around a kind of cherry-picked philosophy. Like I said earlier, there are many, many different Buddhisms. For Western converts, it's primarily been this thing. And I think we're at a stage in the development of this where we have to consciously think about what we're doing there. To what degree are we creating a closed circle or a closed loop or a closed circuit? If I were to say there are some challenges that we, the so-called liberal elite, have to take responsibility for, is that we have walled ourselves off and we have created echo chambers and we have canceled a lot of people. We've stopped wanting to know people who think differently than we do. And I think we have to tell the truth about that. I think if there's any kind of benefit to the really harsh times we're going through right now, I think it's a moment of soul searching and questioning. How have we as the liberal elite contributed to the problems that we're facing? And I think we have, and we have to take responsibility for that. So I do try to put myself in settings where I'm not going to lead with that set of values. What I'm going to lead with is, I'm a human, you're a human, I want to get to know something about you. And again, keep coming back to this concept, I think it takes some real self-discipline and work. It's very hard to change our habits. It's very, very hard to change our minds, to change our hearts. And we have to be committed to it.
And right now, in the time that we're experiencing right now, so many people are in so much pain and so much uncertainty. The go-to for that is we shut down.
Yeah.
We don't open up. We shut down even further. We protect ourselves.
Or we get outraged.
Which is a form of protection.
Yeah, it is. That's the hard armor of self-protection.
Yeah. It does take discipline, as you're saying, to get past that, to say, okay, if the medicine I have to take is being with others, and it's medicine, and it's not going to taste good going down, I'm not going to want to take this medicine.
I agree. That's where I'm at with it, because I just don't think these problems are going to solve themselves by doing the same thing we've always been doing. I mean, Einstein had that famous quote, or whoever it was, we're creating a future. Creating a future is a step through a dark doorway. We're stepping into the unknown. We're penetrating the unknown and creating a future. And we have to be willing to go there. So then my question is, how do I become capable, willing to walk through that dark doorway? Like, what kind of groundedness do I need to have? What kind of truth-telling do I need to do? What kind of wholesome friends do I need to have around me to do that kind of work? And I think it's not enough to just sit around the dinner table and complain about all that's wrong in the world. I think that we have to try to build something that we've not maybe had a lot of experience building. And it's not enough to stay in the complaints department about all this. And so for me, I need to strengthen aspects of myself to do that. And I need to soften aspects of myself to do that. I need to do both things.
Talk about that.
I mean, in many ways, this comes out of my meditation practice. So in meditation, you sit in a posture, you have a strong back and a soft front. And this is a kind of balanced position. So that's a nice little metaphor for how I want to meet the world. That my strength is a kind of belief that I am strong enough to hear really challenging things from other people. I can regulate my nervous system. I don't have to react to everything like somehow a disaster is unfolding. I can down-regulate. And I can also be strong enough to put down my fixed ideas. I don't have to lead with my fixed ideas. I'm stronger than that. I'm strong enough to be soft. And to be soft is a kind of openness, and I think it's an intellectual openness. I think it's an emotional openness. There was this 13th century Zen master named Dogen. He defined enlightenment as openness to things. That's what enlightenment is. And I think I don't want to get caught up in calling it enlightenment. I want to think of it as openness. Am I an open person? Do I let things in? That's what openness means. Do I let it in?
And you're sharing different stories of exposure, whether it is the living room that you're creating or exposing yourself very vulnerably inside a homeless community where they may be suspect of you. There is that thread again of being open to, I can't know unless I'm open.
That's right. Yeah, that's exactly right. I really can't, because all I have in the absence of that openness and the lived experience of being in the situation, in that encounter, is a set of ideas and assumptions.
Yep.
And what is that? That, that that's nothing. That's just a set of ideas and assumptions. There's no realness there. It's just fake news. I've created a story, and unless we're willing to let go of the story, we're just perpetuating a kind of closedness, you know. And I need a community around me to help me with that. I do. This isn't just a solitary project. I'm very curious about what other people find wonderful and exhilarating about that, what other people find really hard and challenging about it. I just think it has to be taken on as, in some ways, as a life project that is bottomless, that you never perfect.
I do think it requires community around you. One of our recent newsletters, we were talking about finding your heart peeps, not just finding the people with whom you agree with and that you want to go to a political rally with, but finding the people that love to do what you love to do so that you can just be together as people. We're wired for that. We're just animals. We're wired for that. We're pack animals.
Yeah.
We need each other for that support. Joshin, if you had one thing that our listeners could take action on, one thing that they could do, what would that be for you?
I'm going to say something really simple.
Good.
Which is like cook a meal for somebody you don't know or don't like. Just have a meal together. See what happens. I mean, it's such a simple thing. I think it's like doing that. Can you open yourself to the element of surprise or wonder or awe in some other person that you had previously written off? And if you can't go that far, then maybe just somebody you don't know. And I say that just because that's what we're trying to do at our community living group. Sit at the kitchen table and say, hey, hi.
Who are you? Tell me who you are.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that. Joshin, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us today and your experience and for just being with us today. I so appreciate that.
It's sweet of you to say that, but you're leading the way, and your work is such an inspiration. I'm so glad you're out there doing it. So thank you.
Thank you.
I'm so grateful to Joshin for sharing his observations and experience with us. So many of my guests talk in some way about connecting with others. How many of the folks you listen to on this podcast suggest stepping outside your front door to get to know the people around you? Joshin takes that all one step further, diving deep into what it can look like when we see connecting with our fellow humans as both a path to social justice and as part of a spiritual practice. I love the idea of focusing simply on the art of hanging out, not as a facilitated conversation or a place with conversation thought starters, but just as a place to be with one another. Joshin reminds us that we're just people, that we all feel pain, we all crave that sense of connection. While we seem to lament the alienation and loneliness of modern life and complain about the polarization of seeing others either as us or them, what Joshin is talking about is a path towards getting to know people simply as fellow travelers on this planet together. That feeling of kinship, seeing each other without our labels, sensing that we belong to each other
and that there is nothing more worthwhile than investing in each other's well-being. Listening to Joshin, we're reminded that absolutely all change is personal, and it starts with each of us. You can learn more about Joshin's work at the podcast page for this episode. And of course, if this episode got you thinking, we hope you'll share this podcast with your friends and colleagues and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And as always, you can learn more about Creating the Future's work at creatingthefuture.org. Thank you for being with us today and for wanting to create a better future for our world. We'll see you next time here at Creating the Future.